there's nuances between, a digital therapeutic, a digital care program, and a digital self-care program. And to some extent, they might be all the same, but some of the nuances I think are important as we sort of go forward. We have built a program for autoimmune patients. So after having been a patient for 20 years myself, I essentially disempowered as a patient, but empowered as a human being, started turning my life into data. And by essentially applying process optimization to my own body, I was able to, in 16 months, reverse my own disease symptoms, essentially become completely symptom and drug free, and have been so for almost 9 years now.
And that is such a common dream for patients, but it's so uncommon for somebody to actually do it. And what I'm talking about is when a patient activates and says, this is not fair, I do not like this, there must be a better way, there must be better medicines. How am I going to do that? And how many people can actually figure out a methodology and execute it and then try it on other people and find that it actually works? So that's one of the things that I've always been amazed about you, Mette, that you managed to hack your own healthcare and then help other people to do it. Patient activism is a huge part of what drives innovation in healthcare, and you are a shining example of that.
Thank you. Well, I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to also the nature of autoimmunity, right? Because I spent 7 years in my early 20s being told it was all in my head, that all of what I was feeling was not true. And I think, then you start getting diagnoses. In my own case, I collected 6 autoimmune conditions. I was taking biologic drugs on a weekly basis. I could barely walk up a flight of stairs at 27. And then, when the system sort of does its magic, because autoimmunity is all of these different processes that are at interplay, but because we have a specialized system, you sort of go to different specialists for each of the different problems you have. There was sort of a stubbornness to it, because when I had, through essentially building offline algorithms and looking at my own health and figuring out what was triggering my autoimmune disease, came back to the hospital, there wasn't resources or even a thinking model where the doctors could take what I had done for myself and bring it to the next patient. And so from my perspective, it really came out of sort of a stubbornness that, if it's possible to do this, there has to be a way to facilitate this more broadly to more patients, because it can't be that all of us have to waste, decades of our lives looking for solutions if there is a much simpler way. So
100%.
Fundamentally, what we do is actually we sort of take and replace traditional lab work with a data-driven model, so data analytics. So we're basically replacing lab work with machine power, and we do that by identifying triggers for why your system gets quote unquote confused and attacking itself. And so it's a very simplistic model in its core form, but there's so many variables. As you can imagine, even if you have 2 patients with lupus, they're siblings, they might even be twins, but they live different lives in different cities, and all of their circumstances are different. So what we do is really look for the needle in the haystack.
And that, that is, your phrase is know thyself well, right? I don't know if you still use it. But yeah, I mean,
no, so we call it know myself. But
there you go, because by me, right? So
exactly.
So let's do the little pitch to make sure everybody understands the problem you're solving, how you solved it. As you know, this is core to how we like all of our early stage companies to tell about themselves. So the model, the mission, the money, the method, the team, and the tech. So go for it. Just give them the quick version, just so people have a quick summary of what Mymee, Mymee, does, and that kind of thing.
So Mymee really is that, Mymee. So it's a mirroring of yourself. It's a reflection of your doppelganger, and it's a combination of an app for self-reporting, data analytics to understand the causality and correlations between what you do and how you feel. And then we have health coaches that are all former autoimmune patients that are then translating these machine learnings into human behavior. And from my perspective, that's probably the most important part, because being told you're allergic to chicken is one thing, but then learning how to sustainably live with that change is really the key to long optimal health. So
so it's
we
health
are
coaches aided by great data gathering and some AI analytics.
exactly. I just had a friend actually sign up for the program a couple of weeks ago, and he said to me that he had questioned the coach around how did it feel different to be a Mymee coach versus being a coach in her prior job. And she had said, working for Mymee is like being granted superpowers. And I sort of love that, because that is essentially the nugget here, is that we found a protocolized way of addressing all autoimmune diseases in a disease agnostic way. We've treated 61 different autoimmune diseases to date.
61?
Yeah.
I thought you had lupus and RA and maybe chronic COVID. Tell me 61. That's fantastic. And you have clinical evidence showing that you're effective in all those cases? I know initially it was done with RA and lupus, right?
So we've essentially proven that we can improve health across all metrics by 57%. And we have actually even taken it a step further. So in the spring of 2020, Mount Sinai came to us and said, we are starting to see this phenomenon of COVID long haulers. There's more question than there's answers, but we know that you are on the forefront of looking at autoimmune disease through a lot of the lifestyle data. So could you help us take on some of these COVID long haul patients?
What a great question. Now I assume that long haul is the same thing as chronic COVID. I mean,
yes, yeah. So it's essentially anyone who still has lingering symptoms 90 days after getting COVID.
Oh, so did you do the study, or is that in planning? I mean, that's pretty exciting.
No, we have the data already. So we've been working with Mount Sinai since June. We are a part of their preferred network, and they're referring patients to Mymee based on the results that we've been able to do.
That's fantastic. So I don't think we really covered your story. I mean, you had lupus, right? And then you basically hacked, figured out what your triggers were, and then figured out how to figure it out, and then you taught a bunch of other people how to do it. Just going to back when we met, you had been in our community in New York, and I knew who you were, and I knew what you were doing. But then you guys entered one of our contests, and that was when you guys really got my attention. Where I think it was 166 people clicked on your project on medstutter.com. One of them was Tiffany Peterson, who, had a large lupus community. She spread it out to her crowd. And then you guys, I think it was 2 partners and three pilots going. And, not really going, but, the inquiries were made and there was significant interest shown, which is what we track. And then I think it was $136,000 was offered for investment at that time. Was that the first $136,000 and first 166 people had said, yes, we'd like to get involved? I think you had already had like 70 patients try it, right?
So Mymee sort of has a long tail. We were founded in 2017, but I had for years before that worked with someone else to essentially look at this issue of how do we apply process optimization to the human body. So we essentially applying an understanding from.
Hey, and Mette, aren't you like an economist?
I'm an economist by training, yeah. Yeah, so we're basically applying knowledge from an analogous field to healthcare. And so looking at sort of the human body as a closed circuit computer system that needs debugging. And yeah, so
of course, like everybody thinks like that. That's great. I love how you're sideways thinking. Your economist point of view really just sort of gave you a different approach to this. It reminds me of something that Esther Dyson once said, which was that I wish more horrible things would happen to more amazing people so they'd come into healthcare and help us fix this. That is definitely what happened with you. And I'm sorry it happened to you, but I'm glad that you're here.
It's sort of funny, right? Because to a large extent, I feel like healthcare is something that only happens to you almost as punishment, because I'm a serial entrepreneur. I sold my first company 20 years ago, and and I like solving problems. And solving the problem of autoimmunity has been a lot of fun, but fitting into healthcare as it works today in the US has been a little bit of a nightmare, because it truly is backwards in many ways. I'll never forget my first conversation with one of the big CEOs for, one of the 10 largest insurance companies in the US. And he was really known as a trailblazer and someone who understood the holistic human and all of that. And we sat down and I showed him my data, and he said, so basically, if I gave you 30 patients, you could save me $1 million. And I said, yes. And he said, well, in that case, there's not really a business here, because I invoice out 3% of what we pay out. So you
the misaligned incentives, somebody shoot me.
And you were sort of like, holy smoke. And we've seen it multiple times. Like, we are able to take 4 out of 10 people on disability back to work, but there's not a disability carrier in this world that's interested, because of the social security payments that you might lose if somebody got well enough to then work part-time.
But nonetheless, you are being accepted into insurance plans like Oscar and another one that I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention. You can mention if you want. So Humana has adopted you. So, but how have you changed the paradigm? I know we've been talking about this for years, but tell the good people, what you did and how you did it, because I think you really hacked how healthcare thinks and works in a lot of ways.
So from my perspective, it was relatively straightforward in the sense that there was, autoimmune is 78% women. If you're of color, you have a higher prevalence. If you're poor, you have a higher prevalence. And typically, if you go the traditional VC route as a healthcare company, you service the 1% in San Francisco as your starting point. And my head, it just would take a very long time to get from the 1% in a small community and those rings to get all the way to the, single mother in New Orleans with 3 children who hadn't been able to work due to her lupus. So from my perspective, it just was a matter of how can we get there faster? And so we understood that going the traditional route was not really for a company like ours. And so what we did was we went out and said, we know what we do works. We know that we can save you money, and we will put our money where our mouth is. And we will basically take your clients 100% at risk, and we will take a percentage of the savings on the backside.
Yeah, and if you recall, I told you that was a terrible idea.
I know, but
I'd like to note that I seem to have been wrong.
It's funny because still to this day, we actually get paid out more on those initial payer clients that is at 100% risk, because, year by year, we save more and more money, which basically means we just get a higher and higher payout.
Yes, but it's a long pay cycle, right? Because you have to wait till a year. I mean, it reduced the risk for the adopters.
Totally. It's not how we are doing it today. Today, we are selling a quality of life improvement program at a fixed price.
Yes. Yeah. What I told you to do in the first place. No, and I'd like to know that your first sale took 2 years and your second sale took what? 3 months?
Yeah. We don't do a PEPM. We do a PMPM.
It's not a huge difference. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it is when you're contracting with a company like Humana, who has 20 million users, right? Because if you could get a couple of cents on every user, it's different than what we do, which is essentially get a high price tactic for everyone that enrolls in the program.
Yeah, no, that's great. But if I was thinking about it though, in retrospect, and while I did, disabuse you of the idea at the time, what it did was it gave them a way to adopt the program, without taking any risk at all, which I think was really smart. And it shows your economist brain. And then that's how you actually wound up hacking the system. That you wound up basically showing and taking risk. And, everything always gets sweeter when you take risk, right?
Yeah.
And then eventually that gave you a nice smooth on-ramp, with other payers, other risk takers, and saying, hey, you can keep the risk, just pay us this standard monthly fee. And you can save money compared to if we took the risk. So, and they are in the risk business. So, and you're in the curing I don't want to say curing, treating autoimmune disease to the point where it feels like a cure.
Yeah. So we definitely don't talk about cures, but I will say, because autoimmune patients will be vulnerable for life, but it's also a part of why, we have a lot of VC interest, because the reality is that we don't only have a program that has a very short, period of time from start to actually resolution. Within the first 8 weeks of people being in our program, 79% has great improvement. So we see very fast results, but because of the vulnerability for life aspect, typically people stay in what we call Mymee care, which is sort of like Apple Care. It's like your insurance, right? So in a way, the way I look at the early days of what we were doing with insurance companies was essentially us being the risk-bearing entity, right? And what we are trying to do now in the direct-to-consumer market is really being the risk-bearing entity for the individual. And whether you can afford to stay in a paid program or you stay on for free in sort of our adjacent program, we will always be there, and you can turn us on as needed. And I think that anyone who's had a chronic disease and known, what it feels like to be essentially shadow boxing every day of your life, because you're, as a chronic patient who's had enough flares in their life, that the chance of it happening again is viable. You just don't know when and where. So everybody is always at this high alert state, and telling people that, hey, we can not only help you, but we are here as a support network, I think actually even psychologically helps sort of take everybody's anxiety down a notch.
I love that metaphor that Mymee care is like Apple Care, but for your autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
Wow. So, I mean, what are the key takeaways on this journey? What would you tell other entrepreneurs that are thinking about doing something disruptive and crazy like this?
I think my biggest thing really is to not be afraid of going into an industry that you know nothing about. As I mentioned earlier, we took knowledge from an analogous field, in this case, process optimization, and really think like Toyota, and applied it to healthcare. And in doing so, we sort of broke a lot of paradigms. And, initially, everybody told me that, you definitely need to hire some really smart doctors. You need to get a lot of doctor advisors, because it will give you all the credibility that you need as a company. And at the time, my thesis was that if I hired a lot of smart doctors, they would bring all of the traditional healthcare knowledge to the table, and that we would essentially be hampered in really disrupting the system. And we only hired our chief medical officer, who is a brilliant Yale-trained rheumatologist. She joined us a year and a half ago, I think, maybe 2 years ago. And, we now have naturopathic doctors as our chief of health coaching. And, we've definitely added that layer today. But everybody says if we had gotten here earlier, we wouldn't have seen this play out, because we simply know too much that this goes directly against.
I mean, traditional allopathic doctors know traditional allopathic doctoring. So if you're going to try to break a model and change things, you don't want to hire one of those unless they happen to have bought into your approach and are really all about shoehorning this idea into new care models, right? And it is a shoehorn kind of thing, right? You have to, and the reason that insurance companies are much more likely to accept a PE or PM model is because that's what they're used to. They're used to charging people based upon on their members, and therefore, paying for a carve-out type service like yours, is something that goes into their equations very easily. The shared savings approach, as I said initially, and the reason that I didn't think it was such a great idea is because they're not used to it. Yes, it definitely makes more sense from an economist's perspective, but from a just like what they're used to, you really have to grease the skids. I'm not talking about payola or anything like that. I'm just saying that you want to make sure that there's no friction in the conversation and that you're speaking their language, and their language is PEPM, which but then again, they weren't ready to accept that. I still don't understand one thing.
Oh, go ahead.
I still don't understand though, if their disincentive to reduce the cost of care What's different about Oscar and Humana that they didn't respond the way that initial CEO did? How'd you hack that one?
So I think that there is a lot of differences in today's world. First off, a company like Oscar is actually very interested in value-based care. They are a new frontier of healthcare payers, and so they were an obvious fit from a philosophical point of view initially.
That makes sense.
A company like Humana is obsessed about improving quality of life for their population. They have not signed a contract with Mymee to save money, even though I think they hope that this will be the outcome like anyone. It's a straight up quality of life improvement scenario.
That is exactly the kind of thing I want to believe. If you look at the glasses I'm wearing in this interview, they're not only rose colored, they're also heart shaped, right? So I want to be optimistic and also look at the world through love and believe that even the big companies are capable of such things. Value-based payments, value-based care paradigms and ACOs and companies with attitudes like Humana's are, I think, what I'd like to believe is the future of medicine, and I'm cautiously optimistic about that. So I'm glad.
So I'm like the overly naive, very optimistic person, and largely probably because I was born in Denmark, right? So I was born in a socialist system where you live from the bottom, and so fundamentally, when we were building Mymee, yes, we knew that we had to disrupt. With our technology and with the program that we built, but we also knew that if we really wanted to have a huge impact, and for me, impact goes way beyond healthcare. The letters that I got at Christmas this year, they didn't talk about healthcare. Sure, people said, thank you so much for helping me get my health back. But the reality is that people sent me pictures of like 3 boys with like new kicks on their hands and big smiles on their faces because their mother, for the first time in 20 years, was back to work and paying, for new kicks to these boys who had never had new kicks. So for those 3 teenage boys, yes, mommy is healthy, but what it also means is that she's now back in the workforce. She's back to having a paycheck that allows her to give her sons a completely different Christmas gift. And so I think health is something we take for granted until we don't have it. And whether it is picking your kids up from school or whether it is being able to, work or something much more impactful, doesn't really matter. But the delta in health equals something else. And it's that something else that I'm interested in. That impact is what really drives this project.
I'm so glad I'm wearing my heart-shaped glasses because I do love so much what you're saying and everything you've done. I mean, let's go back to the original case of Charlotte Norgard, who could actually have a baby. So not just that they have shoes, but that they have babies. Because high-dose prednisone is not good for you long-term. And you can't do stuff like have babies. So you mentioned, what was it, 51 or 61 conditions? Can you just run down? I mean, I almost think of like an Animaniacs, listing of the states kind of thing. But, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, long-term COVID. What else?
Like scleroderma, Sjogren's, psoriatic arthritis, psoriasis, myasthenia gravis, hidradenitis suppurativa. Like most of these diseases have names that literally I could go on, and most people.
Hashimoto's?
Why Hashimoto's, Graves, Basedov's, all the thyroid family. And the
what
thyroid
about
family is
migraines and diabetes?
So migraines and diabetes are both sort of like distant cousins. We don't necessarily see them as
but they have
as straight up autoimmune disease.
They have triggering.
But we have. My guess is about 70% of the population we see also have diabetes. So a lot of our population gets downregulated very significantly from, let's say, I'm not gonna pretend I'm a doctor here, but basically, someone who is on a insulin dosage would typically be downregulated as a part of their health improving in Mymee, or they completely stop metformin or other things. Yeah.
Yeah.
And migraines, obviously, again, are very intercorrelated with autoimmune disease, as is any gut-related. So even though ulcerative colitis and Crohn's and other IBS and IBD diseases are sometimes, the sole reason people seek out Mymee, I will say that what we are seeing is that the majority of autoimmune patients also have gut-related issues.
Wow, that's amazing. So I want to wrap up this portion, but I wanted you to look forward to what's coming next for Mymee. What do we expect to happen in not just in your company, but in the space in general in the next couple of years? And then we're going to open it up to questions. So if you want to ask Dr. Dyhrberg a question, please raise your hand. Go.
So first of all, I'm not a doctor. I'm an economist. And
I'm sorry. I thought you had a PhD in economics.
No, I
was just master's.
I just have a master's. Don't worry.
I'm not a doctor either, so it's all.
It's all good. No, but in this country, I think it's very good to be very specific around what we are and what we're not. So I think from my perspective, what I see happen, unfortunately, is a little bit at first a grim outlook on life, in the sense that we've always known that infections and triggers are the main trigger for autoimmunity. We've just never had a virus like COVID hit over 100 million people in the US at any one given time. And currently the numbers suggest that upwards to 20% of those are COVID long haulers. What that means is essentially that COVID is triggering an autoimmune, in some cases, a pre-autoimmunity that was sort of already there, but people weren't necessarily aware of. And that means that we are seeing an enormous uptake in the number of autoimmune cases in this country. So first off, that is of course horrific, because it's not, really something our system at large is very good at. Lifestyle interventions is something that we still at large are struggling with in this country. But at the same time, I also believe that because of COVID and because of the telehealth interventions and because of all the digital interventions gaining a much larger foothold, we will see a reimbursement come to the market much faster. And that at large will mean we will not be alone in the autoimmune space in the coming years. We can already see that there's a lot of people starting to look at this space. And so overall, the way that I look at healthcare in general is every single player provides a piece of the puzzle. And in order to see the big picture, you need a lot of puzzle pieces. So I actually really embrace and cherish the fact that we are going to be more and more players, and we are going to see a more and more, fine-tailed picture of what this could be. We already are sort of blown away with the data that we have. So that's sort of my idea. And then I think that we're going to see the different spaces merge in a way that we haven't in the past, just because of the gut-brain axis and other things. The data that we are starting to collect now makes a lot of things very visible. And I think it's sort of like, I remember when I was a child, there was a woman who did a triple axis. And up until that point, nobody had been able to do it. And 4 months later, people were doing triple and some even quadruple axes at the World Cup. And I think the way our brain works is sometimes that unless it's seen, we don't imagine it possible. And I truly believe that we are in a time and space where technology is showing us things being possible that we could never have imagined. And that is going to be a very exciting time for healthcare.
I totally agree with you, Mette. These are the amazing days in healthcare. We're seeing so much change and innovation. I got to say, as a early investor, maybe the first investor, certainly the first venture capitalist to invest in you guys, I can't be more proud and more happy. Not just because you've grown tremendously and it's great for our IRR, but just because we like to have an impact. And getting behind you and your team, has been extremely gratifying, and we couldn't be happier. So thank you, Mette, for leading the change that you've done, for showing us the way, and for proving me wrong, because I give a lot of advice and it's not always listened to, and you did listen to a lot of it, but sometimes you have to do it your own way, and I think that made all the difference. So congratulations, Mette.
Thank you so much, Alex.
We also have a number of other really amazing people on stage. Serge, as you may know, has been a member of the Health2O New York City community for a long time. His company got bought and then went public. Serge, do you have a question for Mette?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I hear you fine. Okay. Welcome.
Hey, so good to hear your voice again, Alex, and Mette, congrats. It's very impressive what you've done. So I have a question. I know that Lyme's disease presents itself as an autoimmune disease, but I'm not sure it would qualify as such. Do you have, since it's such an epidemic of Lyme's, especially in this part of the country, has anybody used your methodology, if that's the right word, for Lyme's disease?
So that's actually where we started. Our first couple of years was a lot of Lyme's disease, because from a research perspective, the more confounding something is, the better it is to sort of prove out the methodology. So we started with non-diagnosed confounding autoimmune disease, lots of Lyme's. And then, as Alex said, when we started going into clinical RCTs, we then went on and chose lupus because of the complexities. But yes, so we have worked with Lyme's in the past.
That makes a lot of sense. I actually had Lyme's, and I did a very Mymee-like thing to reduce my symptomology. So that's amazing, Mette. How did I not know that? Thanks, Serge. So Michael, please, do you have a question for?
Yeah, Alex, this is always great topic. Mette, I have I'm super impressed with everything you've done, and I was looking at your website, and I see a NPS, a Net Promoter Score 89. That's like amazing. That's like unheard of. And then your program completion rate 90%. I would love to know, like, how long typically the programs last, and how do you develop how have you done that, an 89 NPS? I'd love to know that story.
It's actually quite funny, because our true NPS score is actually 97%, and my team has refused me, which I still am a little upset about, announcing that, because they say as we grow as a company in size, that number will go down, and they don't want to be under promising. But the reality is we actually have an NPS score of somewhere between 96 and 98 at any given time.
I'm sorry, Mette, can you define what these terms mean for?
Yes, so the Net Promoter Score is basically when somebody has left, you bought a service, or in this case, you've gone through the Mymee program, you get asked a question around whether you would recommend this to a friend. And in our particular case, 97% of people going through Mymee recommends it to friends and family. That's amazing. So it's an endorsement number. And then the completion profile of 90% of people coming into Mymee completing the program, depending on, 90 is across all of our users. We do have some payers where the number is higher as well. And I think fundamentally it comes down to having autoimmunity having been severely misunderstood. So if you've spent 5 years undiagnosed, then you got a diagnosis, and the diagnosis basically led you to essentially maybe get medicated. But the medications today, even the expensive specialty pharma medication, fails 3 out of 4 people. So a lot of people, even when they get the diagnosis that they fought so hard for, didn't really get a lot of relief. And then, unfortunately, typically when you have an autoimmune disease, you collect other autoimmune diseases. So typically we see people having 3 to 4 different diagnoses clinically when we see them. And so coming into the Mymee program, where this was not built for healthcare, this was really built for you as an individual, as a human being that had a problem that needed to be solved. We meet you where you are. There's no judgment. If you are eating cake from the moment you get up to the moment you go to bed, I'm not going to be berating you about the way. I'm actually going to meet you where you are and help you figure out whether cake even has an impact on your disease. but we are in these sort of iterative feedback loops, letting the data drive the project. So for a patient coming into Mymee who's been told they were wrong or it was all in their head, and then they've been given, let's say, 100 different rules that they're intermittently cheating on because they have absolutely no idea what works for them, coming into Mymee is initially sort of like a relief. Finally, there's somebody that they can talk to in their language. There is a way for them to understand exactly what is the blueprint to my body. In, you know, many cases, it's things that people would never have thought. You know, if you're allergic to chicken or you're allergic to cruciferous vegetables, like who would have known that broccoli and cauliflower could make you sick? So a lot of times people sort of get this new version, and at first it feels, you know, like now life is easy. But then, to your point around duration, typically for any autoimmune patient, we will have identified your triggers and have gotten you much better within a 12 to 16 week time frame. So it's a relatively short process, but then, you know, sort of reality hits. And by that, I mean, one thing is staying symptom free. Another one is entering society as you know it, and all of a sudden not be able to eat eggs or chicken or whatever it is. And so at that point is really where the coaches come in. And I see, Michael, that you're always using the language around founders finding their superpowers. That is essentially what we do for the individuals coming into Mymee. We have a big belief that, you know, we can help you reverse your disease symptoms and get better within a 16-week time frame. But if we get to week 16 and you are not feeling like you're in control, we will keep you until you are in the driver's seat. So from Mymee's perspective, the reason that we have the NPS score and the completion rates that we have is because we actually are very invested in you being able to reclaim your health. It's also why in the beginning of this conversation with Alex, he said, Mette, you know, CEO and founder of a digital therapeutics company. I said, well, actually, we've taken a different stand. We call it a digital self-care program, because when at the end of a session, somebody says to me, I had a client recently who had been incarcerated for 25 years before he became my client. Needless to say, there was a lot of regular life skills that he was learning. And he said, you saved my life. And I said, the thing about this is you did all the work. You might not have very good technical skills. There's certainly aspects of doing a program like Mymee where you were fumbling a little bit in the dark, but you've shown amazing life skills. You've done everything. And the moment we've suggested something, you've done it and you've seen the improvements, but it was our suggestions you're doing. And I think that's the difference. We actually don't take credit where credit is not ours. You know, for the most part, people have to do the work themselves. And that's not really how we like to see healthcare. We like to see healthcare as like, take a pill and like magic potion, everything goes away. That's not Mymee. But for someone who struggled for a long time, it is alleviating the problems. And that's what we're all about.
Yeah, it's so fascinating.
Empowering humans.
It's so fascinating, so inspiring, Mette. I love your story. I don't know if we covered this yet, but can you tell us about that first clinical study that showed the effectiveness of the app? I know we alluded to it, but I remember it was against prednisone. Give us the 30-second version about that.
Yeah, so the first RCT we did, which is published as JMRR, is essentially showing that in a severe lupus population, we were able to reduce fatigue, which is the main complaint for this particular population, by 87%. We were able to reduce chronic pain by 50%, and overall physical improvement by 38%. So
versus what, Mette? What was the control and what was the experiment?
Standard of care.
Standard of care representing what? Prednisone? Yeah.
So essentially, if you are on a specialty pharma drug, Humira, whatever that is standard of care.
And then this was as an adjuvant to that, or this was as a replacement?
So
Was it additive, or
comparing,
was it A versus B, or was it A versus A plus B?
So we are not comparing ourselves to drugs. That is not the route that we were taking. So this is additive.
Okay, so they continued on the standard of care, but they also had Mymee as well.
Exactly, A plus B.
Okay, good. Okay, that's exciting though. You made it more effective.
So Michael, I hope, I know it was a long-winded answer, but I hope it answered your question.
More than it was great.
Awesome.
It's almost like it's a form. It's really Anyway, yes, absolutely answered. Thank you so much.
What's instructive is if you're doing it from the right place, and you make your whole company focused on that sort of that ethos, that it will come all the way to the patient, and that's what really drives that net promoter score, right? I mean, I think that's correct. What it does for me. So Anna is another great entrepreneur. Anna, do you have a question for Mette? Okay, Anna probably is also very busy.
No, I'm not. Sorry, I was very far from the phone. So Mette, yes, I love women CEO. So does Alex. He confessed his mother was an entrepreneur as well. So can you tell us, I mean, what in this journey, and congratulations on your venture, I mean, what are some of the lessons learned, right, as a woman CEO? And how can you inspire other women to be CEO? I mean, any lessons learned, anything that you can share with other women to be CEOs, or words of encouragement?
Yeah. Don't listen to Alex.
So I think it's a fundamental point. I had my own sort of advantage because I grew up in Denmark, and we actually don't really have the same differentiation, pants versus skirts, as was very aware of when I got to this country. So I didn't have that sort of ingrained understanding that I shouldn't be able to. And that's sort of, I think, the biggest roadblock for many is, what you see is what you do. But that being said, I think at the end of the day, when you are trying in this particular case to develop a product, it really wasn't so much about being a woman as it was about being able to understand your user. And I am, like 78% of autoimmune patients, a woman. I had spent decades as a patient myself. And so I was seeing eye to eye with my user. And I think a lot of times in this country, we complicate things by talking about the disadvantages. And I almost don't want to say what I'm about to say next, but I still have to stand by who I am, right?
Let's see who the big
frustrated when
wimps
I go
are.
to health, for example, last time at their first conference around how they didn't do inclusion of women. They basically had every luncheon and afternoon and whatever, there was like some female program. And I know it was well-meaning, but the reality is that all of a sudden, all the women ran into this room and talked about how hard it was, while the men was in the hallway doing deals. And so I skip a lot of these like female initiative programs, not because I don't support. I support wholeheartedly. I just don't have time, because when I get up in the morning, I don't take a look at what's between my legs. I wake up and I get shit done. And it sounds harsh and it sounds not loving, and it really is meant with all the love that I can posture. But I think that we in this country have made too big of a deal of it. And I think a lot of women, if they look past the fact that there will be men telling you, like I have met with VCs initially that told me I was too passionate. You have too much passion for this project. This is not really what we're looking for. And you could either say, oh, I'm too passionate, I'm a woman, I'll never get funding, or you knock on the next door. And, one of our advisors, who's a genius and, has invested in tons of companies, he said to me, I think I met with 90 some VCs when I raised for my first fund. And then, as time goes on, you get the credibility and you have your former successes to raise on. And at some point, you can call a couple of people and they will put money in, but it takes time. And I think we as women have this tendency to want to be perfect. So we keep tinkering, we keep wanting to perfect things. And when two people tell us something is wrong, we take that feedback and we really try our best to solve for it. Whereas I think the reality is there is as many VCs in the world as there is, thoughts around how something could be right. Like, I don't know if you heard, but earlier Alex said, well, I advised Mette to definitely not do this value-based model with payers that we ended up doing. If you try and please people, you will find yourself in a limbo and spending all of your time trying to get there. Instead, my belief is that women are bringing something very unique and special to companies. And as founders, they bring a different culture, they bring a different empathy, they bring a completely different skill set. And there is a huge need in a time like this for female founders. But what the biggest differentiator is stand by your conviction. Whether you fail a raise will be up to how good the idea is. But the reality is we can't listen to everybody and we can't get to perfect. We just have to get to good enough. I sort of live by the mantra that the best thing that I can do is make decisions, whether they're right or wrong. Time will show, but I have to make quick decisions because as a startup, you're sort of in quicksand. You have to be moving forward all the time. I don't know if that answers the question, Anna.
Oh, I love it, Mette. I love the get shit done part, and so thanks for this. I love it.
Awesome.
Well, hopefully we'll be interviewing you pretty soon too, Anna. Janet, what do you have a question for Mette?
Hi, thanks, Alex. Yes, Mette, thanks for allowing us to hear this wonderful information. Congratulations on the success of Mymee. I love when you said you just want to get stuff done, and the self-empowerment is something that you carry into your product, and that helps patients more. I'm a nurse, but I've started several businesses and stopped and start trying to be perfect, trying to say I don't have enough experience, even though I've been in the industry for 18 years. So that was really good information, and I just want to thank you and congratulate you on your success.
Thank you, Janet. And I think it sounds like you're already on the right path. So congrats on that.
Okay, so I think we're getting towards the end of our first ever MedStarter Healthcare Innovators interview. We've done tons of events here on Clubhouse. This will be our first recorded interview that we've done ourselves. Anything else you want to share with the audience, Mette? I think you gave a really great example of how to do it right in healthcare. How to be a badass CEO, just taking names and fixing healthcare.
Well, I guess with all that praise, we'll just do a mic drop. No, I think at the end of the day, we're not there, and we'll never be there, right? The reality is that the needle will always move, and you constantly have to evolve with it. I think as a CEO, I'm always 5 years ahead of where we are today, so I feel very impatient. I'm constantly looking at the next trial, at the next event, at the next milestone, and I think at the end of the day, we're probably not all very good at celebrating the wins that we have done to date. So thank you for the kind words, and thank you everyone for the time that you decided to spend with us today. And as Michael Mann says, let's go out and empower everybody to be superhuman.
I love it. Let's be superhumans. Well, thank you, Mette. Thank you, Serge. Thanks Michael. Thanks, Janet, for coming up stage. Thanks, Anna. And thanks you, all the listeners today. If you have questions, you can reach out to Mette. She's the CEO of Mymee, Mymee. If you're interested in investing in great companies like Mette Dyhrberg's Mymee, you can join us at medstarter.vc, or you can join us on Clubhouse with the MedStarter Healthcare Innovators. Every Friday, we run its Friday pitches and about 30 other events during the week, all about healthcare innovation. So join the community of global healthcare innovators called MedStarter. And you can get involved with amazing companies like Mette's. Thank you, Mette. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. And we're just going to end the recording now. And